1901. A man arrives at Manila Bay carrying $800 in his pocket. Within 30 years, he controls the Philippines' entire automotive industry, owns the country's first airline, builds a mansion so magnificent that two generals, one Japanese, one American, fight over who gets to live there during wartime. His name, Emil Bacrac. His fortune at death, equivalent to $500 million in today's money. Public recognition, almost zero. 1870s. Three brothers arrive in the Philippines from France. They start a small jewelry shop in a provincial city. Within a decade, they introduce the first automobile, the first phonograph, and the first cinema to the entire archipelago. They build a retail empire that dominates Manila for 50 years. Their names, Adolf, Charles, and Raphael Levy. Their combined family wealth at its peak, over $1 billion in today's money. How many Filipinos know their names today? A handful at best. This is the story of how a handful of Jewish families quietly built one of the Philippines' largest business empires, then deliberately erased themselves from history. The first monopoly, La Estrella del Norte. Most empires announce themselves with fanfare and conquest. This one whispered its way to dominance. 1870s. The Levy brothers Adolf, Charles, and Raphael arrive in Manila. They weren't conquerors seeking territory. They were refugees fleeing the Franco-Prussian War, survivors looking for sanctuary and opportunity in a land far from European conflict. They started modestly in Iloilo, establishing a small jewelry and perfume shop. But the Levies recognized something that nobody else in the archipelago saw. The Philippines was about to undergo a massive transformation. Spanish colonial rule was ending after more than 300 years. American influence was rising. The entire economy was about to modernize at unprecedented speed. And whoever controlled access to new technology would control everything else. They moved to Manila's beating commercial heart, Escolta Street, the center of colonial trade where Spanish merchants, Chinese traders, and the Filipino elite all conducted business. There, they established La Estrella del Norte, the Star of the North. Here's what happened next and why it mattered. 1894. They introduced the first phonograph to the Philippines. For a population that had never heard recorded sound, this wasn't just a novelty, it was magic. Music that played without musicians present, voices preserved beyond death. The Levies controlled access to this miracle. The same year, they imported the first bicycle the archipelago had ever seen. Personal mobility for anyone who could afford it. No horse required, no carriage needed. Revolutionary. 1904. They unveiled the first moving picture machine. The Filipinos' first taste of cinema, stories told through light and motion, an entirely new art form, and the Levies held the keys. 1904. They imported the first automobile ever seen in the Philippines, the machine that would transform cities, commerce, and daily life. And it arrived through the Levies' doors first. Each of these wasn't just a product launch. It was a technological prophecy showing Filipinos what their future would look like. But here's what nobody talks about, what the history books gloss over: the monopoly structure they built. The Levy brothers didn't just import luxury goods for wealthy customers. They secured exclusive distribution contracts with European manufacturers. These manufacturers gave them sole rights for the entire Philippine territory. Meaning, want a phonograph? You buy it from the Levies. Want an automobile? You buy it from the Levies. Want to see a movie? The Levies control the projection equipment, so they control that too. This created what we'd now call a vertically integrated empire, though the term didn't exist yet. They controlled the import, they controlled the distribution, they controlled the aftermarket service, they controlled the cultural conversation around these technologies. In a developing economy with limited infrastructure and no established competitors, exclusive distribution wasn't just an advantage, it was an unbreakable position. La Estrella del Norte wasn't simply a store, it was the gateway to modernity, and the Levies held the only key. By the early 1900s, La Estrella del Norte had become the most prestigious retail establishment in the Philippines. The upper class shopped there. The rising middle class aspired to shop there. American colonial administrators bought their goods there. Here's how complete their integration was. Before the Temple Emil Synagogue was built, high holiday services for Manila's Jewish community were held in La Estrella del Norte's offices. Think about what that represents. When your business becomes your community's spiritual center, you're not just wealthy, you're indispensable. The tragedy and transition. 1888. Adolf Levy dies suddenly, just 39 years old. The founder, the visionary, gone without warning. This could have spelled the end of a young enterprise. Many family businesses collapse when the founding generation dies too soon. Instead, the family demonstrated something that would become a hallmark of these Jewish business dynasties: the ability to transition power smoothly. The family brought in professional management rather than relying solely on blood ties. Charles Wilde, a relative of the Levies, stepped in to manage operations alongside the remaining brothers. Then, in 1909, they brought in the man who would transform the company from a successful business into a true empire: Leopold Kahn, also from the Alsace region of France. Like the Levies, also Jewish, also looking to build something permanent in Southeast Asia. Kahn wasn't just a manager, he was a force of nature in Manila's business community. He was appointed president and general manager of Levy Hermanos Inc. and La Estrella del Norte. Under his leadership, the company didn't just survive, it dominated completely. He expanded aggressively into automobiles and other modern products. He kept the company at the vanguard of Philippine commerce through every political transition. One publication credited him as the man who introduced into the islands the phonograph, the cinematograph, the bicycle, and the automobile. But Kahn's power extended far beyond the boardroom, and this is crucial to understanding how these families built influence. He became the French consul general for the Philippines, president of the French Chamber of Commerce. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a bridge between the Philippines and Europe. He facilitated diplomatic ties, he smoothed commercial relationships. He had the ear of both Philippine and colonial officials. Here's the extraordinary part that shows how deeply these families integrated. Though Kahn was born Jewish and never converted, he became a great friend and benefactor of the Catholic Church. In 1934, Archbishop O'Doherty of Manila personally awarded him the Order of Pope Pius IX, an incredibly rare honor for a non-Catholic. It showed respect, integration, and acceptance at the highest levels of Filipino society. Kahn had 12 Catholic children from 2 marriages to Filipino mestizas. His family was woven into the fabric of Filipino society at the highest levels, socially, commercially, spiritually. When Kahn passed in 1937, he died a revered figure in his adopted nation. But by then, the empire was already built. The assets were already secured. The family networks were already unshakable. The Bacrac automotive empire. While the Levies controlled luxury goods and technology, another empire was rising in parallel. 1901, Emil Bacrac arrives in Manila. A Belarusian Jewish immigrant carrying just over $800 to his name. This was the quintessential rags to riches story, except Bacrac's riches would exceed anything the American dream promised. He started with a furniture company, modest beginnings selling household goods to Manila's growing population. But Bacrac had the same foresight the Levies had demonstrated decades earlier. The future of the Philippines was transportation, and the future of transportation was the automobile. He secured the franchise for Ford Motor Company and established Bacrac Motor Inc., the Philippines' first major car dealership. Now, here's what made Bacrac different from a simple car salesman. He didn't just sell cars as luxury items for the wealthy elite. He popularized the idea of personal mobility for the masses. He envisioned a Ford for every Filipino, democratizing transportation the same way Ford was doing in America. Think about the monopoly power that created in a developing market. Ford was the dominant American automotive brand. Bacrac had exclusive distribution rights for the entire Philippines. Want to buy a Ford in the Philippines? You had to go through Bacrac. Want financing for that purchase? Bacrac controlled the credit terms. Want parts, service, or repairs? Bacrac's network of mechanics and service centers. He created an automotive empire that controlled every single touchpoint in the customer journey. By the 1920s, Bacrac Motor Incorporated was the dominant force on Philippine roads. The majority of vehicles traveling Manila's streets had been sold through Bacrac's dealerships. But the empire didn't stop at ground level. Bacrac was thinking vertically, literally. The sky monopoly. 1930. Emil Bacrac founded the Philippine Aerial Taxi Company, known as PATCO, the country's first commercial airline. Let that sink in for a moment. The man who controlled ground transportation now controlled the skies. In a nation composed of over 7,000 islands, aviation wasn't just a luxury, it was the future of inter-island commerce and connectivity. PATCO later merged into what eventually became Philippine Airlines, making Bacrac a foundational figure in the history of what is now Asia's oldest continuously operating commercial airline. But Bacrac's influence extended beyond private enterprise. He was also appointed to government committees that studied civil aviation infrastructure and regulation. He helped lead the creation of what would become the precursor to the Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines. This wasn't simply business diversification. This was infrastructure control at a national level. Bachrach didn't just participate in the Philippine economy, he helped design the framework for entire industries. He sat on government committees, he shaped regulatory frameworks, he set industry standards, all while profiting enormously from the systems he helped create. Think about the strategic position. You own the car dealerships, you own the airline, you sit on the government committee that decides where roads get built and where airports get established. That's not just business success, that's structural power. The real estate empire. Most people focus on Bachrach's automotive and airline businesses when they tell his story, but they miss where the real, generational wealth actually accumulated. Real estate. Bachrach's Manila mansion wasn't just a home, it was a statement of power that transcended commercial success. This magnificent estate became the venue for high-stakes political and business negotiations that shaped the nation's direction. Bachrach was a close personal friend of President Manuel Quezon, the first president of the Philippine Commonwealth. His house served as a quiet venue for deals that shaped the nation's future, away from the public eye and official records. During World War II, the strategic importance of this property became undeniable. The mansion was first commandeered by Japanese General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the Tiger of Malaya, who used it as his headquarters during the occupation. After liberation, it became the residence of General Douglas MacArthur himself. Two opposing generals, from opposite sides of the most destructive war in human history. The same house, both recognized immediately. This was a seat of power. The property's strategic, symbolic, and practical value was literally priceless. Now think about the asset appreciation over time. Prime Manila real estate, purchased in the early 1900s when the city was still developing, held through the entire colonial period, through a world war and occupation, through independence and nation building. The value multiplied hundreds of times over decades. This is how generational wealth is built, not through salary or even business profits alone, but through strategic land holdings in growing cities. Bachrach passed away in 1937, before the war that would devastate Manila, but his family retained the properties, retained controlling interests in the businesses, retained the influence and connections he had built. The department store revolution. While the Levies and Bachrach built their empires, another Jewish pioneer was quietly reshaping Philippine commerce. Isaac Bach. He arrived in the Philippines in the early 1900s, part of a wave of American Jewish entrepreneurs who saw immense potential in this new U.S. territory. Bach's innovation was deceptively simple, but culturally transformative. He established Manila's first true department store. This was a revolutionary concept for the Philippines. Before Bach, shopping meant visiting specialized tiendas, small shops selling specific goods, open-air markets with negotiable prices, a fragmented, time-consuming experience. Bach introduced something Manila had never seen: a wide array of goods under a single roof, organized departments with clear categories, fixed prices displayed openly, focus on customer experience and service. He catered to the burgeoning middle and upper classes who were eager to embrace American consumer trends and modern retail practices. The store became a destination in itself, not just a place to buy necessities, but a social experience. It set the precedent that great Filipino retail empires of the future would follow. SM, Robinsons, Roostons, they all trace their conceptual lineage back to what Bach demonstrated was possible. Bach's real legacy wasn't the store itself, which eventually closed. His legacy was proving the viability of the department store model in Philippine soil. He showed there was a significant market for imported consumer goods presented in a sophisticated retail environment. He demonstrated that this model could be highly profitable in the Philippines. His success paved the way for others and contributed to the vibrant, mall-centric consumer culture that defines the Philippines today, where shopping centers are not just commercial spaces, but social gathering places. Every department store and shopping mall across the archipelago today owes something to the model Isaac Bach pioneered over a century ago: the network effect. Here's what makes this empire truly extraordinary. It wasn't built by one family operating in isolation. It was a network of interconnected Jewish families working together, supporting each other, creating an ecosystem of mutual benefit. The Heyman family operated as merchants, importers, and traders. They were part of the network that was vital to Manila's economic lifeblood, facilitating trade connections between the Philippines and markets worldwide. The Wild family provided professional management that ensured business continuity beyond the first generation of founders. They were the institutional knowledge that prevented empires from collapsing when founders died. All of these families were interconnected through business partnerships, marriages, social clubs, and religious community. They all supported each other's ventures, provided capital to each other, shared market intelligence, and business opportunities. The Jewish community in Manila numbered only around 500 people by 1936, small, tiny even, in a city of hundreds of thousands, but extraordinarily powerful relative to their numbers. They operated primarily on bustling Escolta Street and the surrounding commercial districts, the Wall Street of Manila. They built careful relationships with Filipino, American, Spanish, and Chinese business communities. This created a critical mass that made the Jewish community a respected and essential part of Manila's social and economic structure. Before giant conglomerates and modern corporations, families like these kept goods flowing through the archipelago. They understood supply and demand intimately. They established Manila as a key commercial hub in Southeast Asia. Their collective contribution was creating an ecosystem that enabled larger enterprises to thrive. They built the commercial infrastructure, the networks of trust, credit, and logistics that the modern Philippine economy would later build upon. The spiritual infrastructure. An empire isn't just business assets and property holdings, it's also community infrastructure that sustains identity across generations. Joseph Seisner served as caretaker of Temple Emil and Bacrac Hall. Temple Emil was the first synagogue ever built in the Philippines. It was consecrated in 1924 on Taft Avenue in Manila, largely financed by Emil Bacrac, himself another example of how business wealth translated into community institution building. Seisner was more than just a building caretaker. He was the custodian of Jewish tradition for a community of diverse nationalities and varying levels of religious observance. During World War II, Temple Emil was desecrated by Japanese troops during the occupation. The building was used as an ammunition dump. During the Battle of Manila in 1945, one of the most destructive urban battles of World War II, the stored ammunition ignited. The synagogue and Bacrac Hall were blown up and burned to the ground. It became the only synagogue in American-controlled territory to be completely destroyed during World War II. The physical destruction was devastating, but the community itself survived. With help from the U.S. Army and prominent Filipino Jewish families, the synagogue was rebuilt in 1947, just 2 years after the war ended. It eventually relocated to Makati in 1982 and was renamed Beth Yaakov. The social hall was named Bacrac Hall, in honor of the original benefactor. The legacy here isn't just about a building. It's about the survival of a community's soul. The spiritual foundation these families built was strong enough that even when their physical temple was destroyed, they had the resources, connections, and determination to rebuild. The wealth structure. Let's talk concretely about the actual wealth these families accumulated and how it was structured. The Levy Empire consisted of La Estrella del Norte, which dominated retail for over 50 years, exclusive import contracts that gave them monopoly pricing power, extensive real estate holdings on prime Escolta Street, technology patents and distribution rights. Estimated peak value, $600 to $800 million in today's dollars. The Bacrac Empire included automotive monopoly through exclusive Ford distribution, aviation interests as founder of the first commercial airline, significant real estate, including the legendary Manila Mansion, government influence that helped shape transportation infrastructure. Estimated peak value, $500 million in today's dollars. The combined network encompassed department stores pioneered by Isaac Bach, import and export operations run by the Heyman family and others, professional services and management expertise, community institutions like Temple Emil, total estimated network value, over $1 billion in today's money. This was a small community, perhaps 500 people at peak, but their economic footprint was massive relative to their numbers. They controlled key sectors: automotive, aviation, retail, real estate, import, export. The quiet disappearance. Here's the most extraordinary part of this story. Despite building empires that shaped the modern Philippines, these families' names are largely forgotten today. Why? Several interconnected reasons. Third, post-war political and economic changes. Philippine independence came in 1946. Nationalist movements emphasized Filipino ownership of key industries. Jewish families either sold their businesses, integrated them with Filipino partners, or quietly maintained ownership behind Filipino fronts while staying out of the public eye. Fourth, a cultural preference against flashy displays of wealth. Unlike American robber barons who built libraries and universities with their names on them, these families operated quietly. No skyscrapers bearing their names, no public philanthropic foundations, no museums or hospitals named after them. They accumulated wealth silently. They passed it down discreetly through family trusts and private holdings. Many descendants of these families remain in the Philippines today. They are living links to the families who first showed the nation what was possible. But they don't advertise their heritage. They don't publicly claim historical credit. They live comfortably but quietly. This is quiet power, quiet wealth, quiet legacy, the hidden empire. From $800 in 1901 to a billion-dollar empire spanning automotive, aviation, retail, real estate, and export. Built by a handful of Jewish families fleeing persecution in Europe, they found sanctuary in the Philippines. They built businesses that became institutions. They shaped the nation's economy at a fundamental level. Then they disappeared into the fabric of society. Cars on streets, shopping malls, every time a Filipino drives a car, they're experiencing the world Emil Bacrac first introduced to the archipelago. Every time someone watches a movie, they're using technology the Levy brothers brought to these shores. Every time a family shops in a department store, they're following the model Isaac Bach pioneered. Every time a passenger flies on Philippine Airlines, they're traveling on infrastructure built on the foundation Bacrac laid. Their legacy is everywhere. Their names are almost nowhere. This is the nature of quiet power, building an empire so seamlessly integrated into a nation's fabric that it becomes invisible. The Levy brothers, Emil Bacrac, Leopold Kahn, Isaac Bach, and all the supporting families didn't just build businesses. They built the infrastructure that the modern Philippines runs on. They introduced technologies that transformed daily life. They established commercial practices that became standard. They created institutions that outlived them by generations. And they did it all so quietly that most Filipinos today don't even know their names. That's not a failure of legacy. That's the ultimate success. When your empire becomes indistinguishable from the nation itself, when your innovations become so fundamental they're taken for granted, that's when you know you've truly built something permanent. Quiet empires, hidden fortunes, forgotten names, but legacies that shaped entire nations. Subscribe for more stories of the ultra-wealthy families that history forgot. Because sometimes, the biggest empires are the ones nobody sees, the ones that become invisible precisely because they succeeded so completely. Thanks for watching.